Good afternoon, everybody. What's happening? What's going on? This your girl Tiffany coming through here live in effect. Today on this beautiful Monday, March the 7th, 2022. As I still continue to kick it off in Women History Month. I already know what the business is. So today's topic, I want to get into the activism and back into the education. So this woman, um, not many know about her. Not many heard of her. Okay. But I have heard of the name before. But Ramona H Edelin, right, is one of the reasons why we can use the term African American today. See, many people thought that it was Jesse Jackson that popularized the term, right? Now, what people don't know that the terminology been used for a very long time, way before Jesse Jackson even came about, right? Go as far back as the late 1790, 1800s, okay? But it wasn't a very popular term, all right? So it wasn't until one day this lady sat down with Reverend Jesse Jackson around 1988, and they had a discussion, a conversation, and she said, we need to start calling ourselves or identify with being African American versus just being called black, because she believed that we should be able to have some form of connection with our heritage, our lineage. So it wasn't just Jesse Jackson that made it popular. She also came to him and had a meeting with him. Now, at this time, she was a chief executive officer of the National Urban Coalition, right? So that National Urban Coalition was created out of the riot that took place in 1967 in multiple cities, and most of them was race riots. So they were in the response to that. So Ramona Edelin joined the National Urban Coalition around that period of time, around 1970, I think around 1972, 1973, somewhere like that. She joined the coalition. And so, and she was very active, she was very prominent, and she also taught Afro American history, okay, at many at universities as well. And now she's a director of the Washington. Now she's a director at the Washington D.C. Charter School. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into the information. I'm gonna go into history, background, and all of that, so I can go into a little bit more detail. I have some sources here, and also I am going to, yeah, I just got some sources here that pretty much go into a lot of the information, whatnot. But before I go there, make sure you guys subscribe and hit the notification bell, share the channel, like the channel. Also, check out the video contents I also did on here. So I want you guys to be able to check that out and, look at the sources and go dig up information for yourself. Sit down and have a conversation with your family member, your loved ones about this. All this great stuff. And then we'll go from there. All right. So let's go ahead and let's get started, shall we? Okay, so as you can see, this is Ramona Edelin. All right, that's Ramona Edelin. All right, so who is she? So Ramona Edelin is an American academic, activist, and consultant. Edelin is credited with introducing the term African American into the general vernacular. She has been named one of the most influential Black Americans by Ebony. Today, she serves as executive director of the DC Association of Charter Schools. All right, she was born on September the 4th, 1945 in Los Angeles, California, to George and Annette Hodge. Well, but some sources say she was born in South Carolina. Okay. Some sources say she was born in South Carolina, but here it says she was born in Los Angeles, California. But let's continue. All right, so she was born to George and Annette Hodge. She is an only child. Hodge family moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and she, oops, and she attended elementary school in Georgia. Her family moved again, this time to Carbondale, Illinois, and she briefly attended high school there before her family moved to Massachusetts, while Edelin attended Stockbridge High School. So she graduated in 1963. In 1967, she married Kenneth Edelin. The couple had two children together and eventually divorced. She earned her bachelor's degree from Fisk University in 1969. While at Fisk, she became a member of the Phi Beta Kappa. She earned her master's degree at the University of East Anglia in 1969. In 1981, she completed her PhD in philosophy at Boston University. Okay. So Edelin taught at various institutions after completing college in 1969, including the University of Maryland, Emerson College, Brandeis University. She founded the first African American Studies program at Northeastern University in 1972, a period in time when she is also credited with introducing the term African American to the academic community. She left Northeastern and started working for the National Urban Coalition in 1977. Okay. In 1988, she met with Jesse Jackson and other black leaders. During the meeting, Edelin shared the meaning and importance of the term African American. Shortly thereafter, Jackson began regularly using the term, popularizing it in the American vernacular. By 1989, she was serving as president and chief executive officer of the National Urban Coalition. She created the M. Carl Holman Leadership Development Institute and the Executive Leadership Program and created landmark education programs for African American children. Edelin joined the board of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation in 1991. In February 1998, after leaving the National Urban Coalition, she became the foundation executive director. That same year, she was appointed by then President Bill Clinton to the Presidential Board on Historically Black Colleges and Universities. She also visited South Africa with Clinton that year. She left the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation in 2002. She served for 1 year, starting in 2003 as Vice President Policy and Outreach of the Corporation for Enterprise Development. She now serves as Executive Director of the DC Association of Charter Schools. Okay, so she resides in Washington, D.C., and there's more further reading at the bottom. And here are the references at the bottom. Now, that's the Wikipedia source. I have a book right here. It's called Black Women in America by Darlene Clark Hine. Okay. So in this book, I'm going to read the information. Okay. It says, as a standard bearer of African American scholarship and culture, Ramona H. Ramona H Edelin has excelled as both an organizer and educator. Whether teaching college, founding an Afro-American Studies department, or serving as president or chief executive officer of the National Urban Coalition, Edelin has always been on the cutting edge of cultural relevance. Born in Los Angeles on September 4, 1945, Edelin was the only child of Annette Lewis Hodge and George Hodge. Her mother, later Annette Lewis Finazzi, was the first woman to receive a degree in library science from Columbia University. She went on to serve as teacher and librarian in a variety of colleges and universities. As a result, young Ramona grew up in the academic world. Her family moved first to South Carolina State College at Orangeburg, then to Atlanta University in Georgia, and later to Southern Illinois University at Carbondale. She attended to Laboratory School of Atlanta University, Oglethorpe Elementary, then Lincoln Junior High School at Carbondale. She graduated in 1963 from Stockbridge School, a high school in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. Edelin went on to Fisk University, where she collected distinction throughout her undergraduate career. As a sophomore in 1964, she received the Sarah McKim Maloney Award. Later, she was part of a select number of undergraduates chosen to pursue intensive study at Harvard University. She graduated from Fisk in 1967 with a BA magna cum laude in philosophy. She then married Kenneth Edelin, a doctor, and followed him to England, where he was stationed in the U.S. Armed Services. While there, she attended the University of East Anglia in Norwich, England, earning an MA in philosophy. After graduation, she taught at the European Division of the University of Maryland, lecturing in logic. After Edelin returned to United States, she studied philosophy at Boston University, earning her PhD in 1981. Her dissertation was on W.E.B. Du Bois, who continued to influence her thinking and strategy. All right. Shout out to brother Ibibio. What's going on, brother? Shout out to you. All right. And so then it goes on to say, while pursuing her PhD at Boston University, Edelin taught at Northeastern University, also in Boston. In 1972, she became acting chairperson of Afro-American Studies. In 1974, she became full chair of the department. She taught philosophy at nearby Emerson College from 1974 to 1975 and was visiting professor of Afro-American Studies at Brandeis University for the same period. So in 1977, Edelin joined the National Urban Coalition in Washington, D.C. This was an organization founded in response to the riots of the 1960s in order to foster a national urban agenda. Edelin began as executive assistant to the president and by 1979 became director of operation. In 1981, she became vice president of operations. The next year, she was promoted to vice president of program and policy, and by 1982 became chief executive officer. So, as CEO of the National Urban Coalition, Edelin has emphasized two special programs. The first was Say Yes to a Youngster's Future. This was a family learning project designed to expose children and teenagers to the fields needed for high technology, including science, math, and computers. So she was really into so she's really into a STEM program as well. She believed the importance of STEM and to get African American children involved in it. All right, so it says the other program was the Leadership Strategy Series. This series of meetings and conferences assembled leaders from politics, business, education, and community groups to decide on strategy for public policy. Okay. Edelin has been particularly identified with what she has called the cultural offensive. By this time, she means the need for African Americans to establish full cultural integrity as a necessary step on their path to economic and political power. In 1989, Edelin was chairperson of the African American Summit, another step toward establishing and unified national agenda for African Americans. Partly for her work there, she received the Southern Christian Leadership Conference Leadership Award for Progressive Leadership in 1989. Edelin continues to influence national thought with her weekly column on the cultural offensive, along with her work at the coalition. So now, this come from this book. So the book is pretty old. Let's see what year this book was written. This book was written in 1997. So it's been written about 25 years ago. It's pretty old, but it still has some great information in there. Okay. So let's get into how the conversation about or the identity of African American came into existence, right? How we go from being Negro to being Black to being African American. So I got some information here that I would like to share. All right, so I'm not going to read all of it, but it kind of relates into the topic. It's called What is Africa to Me? Language, Ideology, and African American. Author Geneva Smitherman. And the source comes from the American Speech, summer 1991. Okay, page 115 to 132. And it was published by Duke University Press. Okay, so all right, there we go. All right. What is Africa to me? Language, ideology, and African American. And here's a quote: "Star, what is Africa to me? Copper Sun or Scarlet Sea? Jungle Star or Jungle Track? Strong bronze man or regional black? Women from whose lions I sprang. When the birds of Eden sang. 3 centuries removed from the scenes his father loved. Spicy grove, cinnamon tree. What is Africa to me? County Colon." All right, so let's start right here. It says the relationship of Black Americans to Mother Africa is being raised anew and in a broad public forum as the national Black community struggles with the call to move from the racial destination Black to African American. Because of Reverend Jesse Jackson's widespread popularity, many have assumed him to be the catalyst for the current linguistic change. However, it was actually Dr. Ramona H Edelin, president of the National Urban Coalition, who in late 1988 proposed that the then upcoming 1989 summit be called the African American Summit because of, okay, because of the semantics would establish a cultural context for the new agenda. Okay. Taking up Edelin's call at the December 1988 news conference to announce the summit, Jackson indicated that just as we were called color, but were not that, and then Negro, but not that, to be called Black is just as baseless. And further, like other groups of Americans, African Americans want to link their heritage to the land of their origin. Okay. So the issue of racial semantics set in motion by Edelin, Jackson, and others have generated far greater national publicity and media attention than the summit itself. In addition to extensive coverage, the New York Times articles have appeared in Time, the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Post, several metropolitan dailies across the country, and in Ebony, Essence, and other African American media. CBS Not Watch News hosted an hour-long panel discussion on the issue. Even Ann Landers devoted attention to the question, publishing responses in one column and indicating in another column that African Americans seem appropriate because it get away from color and designated origin instead. I hope it catches on. So it goes on to say, as recently as of October 28, 1990, the Washington Post National Weekly Edition featured the issues in a column by Michael Spector, headline Men and Women of Their Word, but should that word be Black or African American? And in December 1990, as I was writing this article, Rosemary Bray dealt with the topic in a special session of Essence. It goes on to say that in as much as the current linguistic movement is complexified by the dynamic of race, there are bound to be cases of uncertainty as well as confusion. Lexicographers such as those at Random House and the mainstream press such as the Associated Press and the New York Times are waiting for a consensus among speakers and writers before establishing a policy decision on Black versus African American. Although the United States Census Bureau did not use African American as a category on the 1990 census form, reportedly because the call for change was issued too late to be included. The Bureau did add special instruction to the form indicating that Black or Negro includes African American. Humorous instances of linguistic confusion are starting to crop up as these two examples indicate. We, the Black African American people, will soon rise to our God-given greatness if we just hold on to his unchanging hand. An item in Thursday Nation's Digest about the Massachusetts budget crisis made reference to new taxes that will help out Massachusetts back in the African American. The item should have said back in the Black. Then goes on to say this article seeks to eliminate the age-old question of a name for the enslaved African population of the United States and its emancipated descendants. Two dimensions of the question will be presented. First, the history of racial labeling from the perspective of the changing material condition of blacks, and contemporary opinions about the use of African American based on the author's 5 city survey of public opinions about language matters. All right, so now remind you, this article was written in 1991, okay? So there was a debate then about the term African American, okay? Like the question was, well, what is that? What that's supposed to mean? What does it mean to be that? So people were so used to being called Negro and Black. And then when African American became popular, right, it became new for many people. But for some people, they already knew about the term. They already studied the history. Okay. So, I mean, and this is what happened when we all go through identity crisis, because we don't gain enough exposure to the historical information about our heritage and our lineage in this country. So we go back and forth as to what to call ourselves, this thing other. Now today you got another group like the ADOS and the FBA. That's what they want to identify themselves as now, because they don't want to have any type of association with being called African. So, but that's either here or there. Let's continue. Okay. All right, so let's go down. Let me just scroll down a little bit. It says, for African Americans, the semantics of race have been reoccurring theme in our social linguistic construction of reality since 1619. When the first cargo of African slaves landed at Jamestown, the societal complexity of the Black condition continues to necessitate a self-conscious construction of identity. Notwithstanding historical, cultural, and cosmological linkage with the continental diasporic Africans, and further, notwithstanding similarity between American slavery and slavery in other historical epochs. The African American, as James Baldwin once put it, it is a unique creation, whereas other African peoples lay claim to national identity in countries where the population is Black. For example, Jamaicans, Ghanaian, Bayesian, Nigerians, African Americans claim national identity in a country where most of the population is non-Black. After being emancipated and granted citizenship, there were and continue to be profound implications for a group with a lifetime Sunton trying to forge an identity and a life in the midst of the European American population, which for decades had found them lacking the necessity of intellect and morality. All right, so then down here it says from 1619 right up until emancipation. In fact, the identity question was complexified by the widely divergent statuses of Blacks. Because of the commonality of skin color, it was impossible to distinguish permanent from temporary African slaves. Or either of these from those Africans freed by their masters or those born to free parents. None of the aforementioned groups, by virtue of Blackness alone, could be distinguished from escaped fugitive slaves. And what about the products of miscegenation or miscegenation, excuse me, where one parent was European and therefore free. The other parent was African slave, and the color and the skin color was light Black. African Europeans in colonial America used racial labels based on what was for them the critical category of enslavement. Thus, depending on the status of Africans, were referred to as free or slave. Where enslavement status was unknown and where there was occasion to use a collective term for all Africans, they used nigger, not a racial epithet, until the late 19th century, or Negro, Portuguese adjective Black, used by 15th century Portuguese slave traders, lowercase, until the 1920s. It says, although the small number of free Africans tended to refer to themselves as colored, the most frequently used label for free and slave alike was African. The first church was called the African Episcopal Church. The first formally organized self-help group was designated for the Free African Society, followed by the African Educational and Benevolent Society, the Sons of Africa Society, and the African Association for Mutual Relief. The first Masonic Lodge was called the African Lodge number 459, and the writer of one of the first slave narrative referred to himself as Oluda Iquiano, or Jataves Vasa, the African. So basically, the author of this article is going into the historical context, right, of how the term African was used throughout history. So it wasn't just the first time in 1988 the word African came about or came up. The term African was used during the time of slavery, during the time of building coalitions, organization, and groups, and it was still used, but it was not politically recognized until that time period, until the 80s. But before that, it wasn't politically recognized. It was either you was black, colored, Negro. That was the term that you was going to be called. All right, so and it says social linguistic reality, these early Africans constructed reflected a distinct African consciousness. Since the African experience was still very immediate for most blacks, regardless of their status, the possibility of return to Africa haunted them constantly. 2 years before signing the Declaration of Independence, a group of African slaves formally petitioned the British governor of Massachusetts for permission to return to Africa. The legendary folk hero Solomon was believed to have the capacity to fly back to Africa and hence freedom. In fact, according to Asante, what some scholars refer to as the African American pre-generic quest myth of freedom speaks originally to escape to Mother Africa out of bondage, with Canada and northern United States coming in at a later historical stage. In any case, the ideological function of the label African served as a logical rally point, since all blacks had current or ancestral ties to Africa, whether they were temporary or permanent slaves, free men / women, fugitives, or mixed bloods. Okay. Abadi, if the mother was a slave, the usual case, the offspring was also classified as a slave. Africans symbolize a common heritage, thus becoming a vocal unifying semantics for socially divergent groups of Africans, both creating and reinforcing the social construction of group solidarity and commodity. All right, so that's all the information I wanted to read upon. So right here, again, the article comes from Duke University Press. It's called What is Africa to Me? Language, Ideology, and African American by Geneva Smitherman. And this was written in 1991. Okay. All right, so that is all I have for that. And yep, that's all I have for that. And with that being said, this your girl Tiffany, and I'm logging off with saying peace and power elevation be to all of you. Y'all have a good one. And I hope you all be safe. And thank you for checking out my channel. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell and share this channel and check out the contents on here. And I will talk to you guys later. All right. Peace. Until next time.